Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Broadcaster Hour. Roger Hoover with you from Tuscaloosa. Kyle Crooks joins me from Gainesville, Florida. And today we have our first guest on the Broadcaster Hour. He is Adam Amin of ESPN fame. He joins us from Chicago. Adam, how's everything going for you?
Not too bad, boys. Good to talk to you. Good to see you. Good to hear your voices, all that.
Yeah, we're just trying to find a way during this COVID-19 pandemic quarantine life, try to catch up and talk a little broadcasting. Just first of all, what have the last few weeks been like for you at home?
Quiet. Obviously, I'm more fortunate than most, so it is a luxury to be able to sit around and try to entertain yourself. But all good. This feels normal. This is a nice sense of normalcy to be able to just catch up with you guys and just talk for a little bit.
Adam, how much are you using this time to maybe watch old games that you've done, listen to old games that you've done, just try to, I feel like every broadcaster out there is just trying to find ways during this time to listen to themselves, critique, get better. How are you utilizing this time?
Yeah, I took a break for a while from actually listening, but what's been nice is having these discussions has been great because this is the way that I feel like I've kept mindful about the profession and about the job, the specific job of calling games. Because obviously this is a time where live sports aren't happening. That's all part of the process of getting back to some normalcy. But being able to talk about these things and the philosophy of it, that feels more like a good exercise for me personally. It's been nice to not have to talk. One thing I miss is I feel like my voice isn't as strong as it was because you get so used to during the grind of the year. And obviously you might get sick here or there, but for the most part, when you're healthy, you're doing a lot of games. You feel strong at the end of the spring or at the start of the spring, end of the winter, and I don't feel as strong. Not talking as much, not doing games. So that's been interesting dealing with that. But on the mental side of it, just kind of thinking about the job, thinking about the philosophy and the approach to it, maybe some of the more nuanced things about it rather than the mechanics of it. Kind of taking a second dive into why you do things or specifically how you might, go about broadcasting a game or certain aspects of it. Thinking about those things and talking about those things has been a good exercise, I think, in the interim.
For you, let's go back to the very beginning. Of course, a very good place to start. Why did you start to like play-by-play broadcasting when you were younger? Who were some of your early influences that made you think about this as a career?
I remember the first announcer automatically that I ever heard was Harry Carey, just because I grew up, in the 80s when the Cubs were on WGN, and Harry Carey was the voice. I mean, he was about as associated with a team as any broadcaster. And mind you, this is a guy who worked for the White Sox for a long time in some successful years. He'd worked for the St. Louis Cardinals in some very successful years. So for him to be associated with the Cubs as strongly as he has been, considering a lot of success at prior stops, like that, he was the Cubs to me. He was my kind of conduit to Cubs games. My dad, who was a big fan, was obsessed with the Cubs, and hence I suffered for as long as I did with him for 30 years. But it was, I think, hearing his voice and associating that with something I enjoyed watching. Okay, so this is a job, but it never really clicked for me that this was a career. Like, I got it was a profession, I got it was a job. I didn't realize it could be considered like your career at some point. So Harry Carey was the first voice I remember hearing. Pat Foley was the voice of the Blackhawks and still is and forever, it feels like, since my childhood. I'm sure a lot of you guys have grown up on PlayStation and throwing on a game and messing around and describing it. That's what I would do with my NHL games, because I remember hearing and watching Pat Foley, this voice that I associated with something that I enjoyed watching on TV and enjoyed watching with my father and my brother. Just associating that with what this job was. So your first influence is Pat Foley, so that's why you do a bad nasally impression of him when you're doing, play-by-play of NHL 94 on Sega. When I first got into the art and craft of it, you start looking locally. So for me, it was Jim Durham longtime radio voice of the Bulls, and then more so for me was the voice of NBA on ESPN radio in the years that I started becoming a student of this. So he was a major influence. Kevin Calabro, who's one of my favorite NBA announcers of all time. Wayne Larrabee, who I think is still one of the 2 or 3 best football announcers on the radio to ever do it. Pat Hughes locally, Cubs on the radio. And then nationally, the Mike Tiricos of the world, Ian Eagle, who's played a very, very, very significant role in my growth and development in this profession. Dan Schulman, Sean McDonough, that list is fairly lengthy, much like it is for, I'm sure, a lot of us.
When you started taking your first steps in the play-by-play business, did you reach out to anybody who really helped you early on?
Ian certainly did, and he took a liking to me and reached out. I'd been doing a minor league baseball season in New Jersey, and Ian and his good friend Bruce Beck, who does a great job with NBC in New York, they had put together this sportscasting camp for kids for a long time, and would come to the ballpark for the team that I used to work for, and that's how I got introduced to Ian, and we struck up a friendship and what I would consider a mentorship ever since. And I'm sure there's plenty of announcers around the country who would say something similar about him or several other announcers. Just the fact that he took a liking and an interest and had some investment played a major role in me not only getting better at the job because of his kind of tutelage and guidance, but gave me more confidence as an announcer. So to have that kind of swing how you do the job, I think that was really impactful in particular early on. I think that was really important to have that type of influence right away. So being able to reach out, get advice, get critiques, and again, not the only one. A lot of announcers talk about this. One of the great joys they get is hearing from younger announcers, whether they're reporters and play-by-play announcers, anchors, whatever, and just being able to have some kind of pipeline to information or to assurance, not even necessarily like actual advice. Sometimes it's just the assurance that you're doing things the right way and not feeling like, well, this didn't garner any results. This resume tape didn't get me a job, so I must be terrible at this, which is, I'm sure, a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of us have dealt with at one point or another. To have that pipeline of advice and guidance, more about the mental side of it and the journey of it, huge for so many of us and for me for sure, with a long list of people who are kind enough to open their emails or give me give a cell phone number or give an email address or whatever.
You mentioned the confidence factor, and I had talked to a class the other day about just the roller coasters of the business. You're going to go through points where you are not confident in yourself and
Sure.
You don't think the career is going to pan out for you. How did you push through those scenarios early on, say pre-ESPN?
Yeah. I didn't deal with it great, in all honesty, out of the gate. There were times where I was very and I unnecessarily hard on myself for things that oftentimes are out of my control. And I think that's what is hard to learn as a young person, as somebody in I would imagine they're early to mid 20s who's out of school or maybe in their first or second job or trying to learn something and to advance their career. It can be significantly frustrating, and you're looking for something to blame because your brain's trying to say, well, there has to be some justification for this, right? We can't be terrible. We can't be awful at this. So your brain is constantly looking for something. And if it doesn't find anything because it doesn't have control of any of these aspects of the situation, it's going to turn on you for a second and go, well, this must be your fault. You must have done something wrong. And you get this like hit and you think, well, it snowballs. Well, this isn't going to last. Like I probably picked the wrong path. Maybe I picked the wrong job. Maybe I picked the wrong school. And like you start to go over all these decisions that you've made when in actuality, you don't have control over the situation. And I think that a lot of people hear that, but it's hard to really put into words why that's important to avoid. And I think this is why, you just have a tendency to beat up on yourself for things that are out of your control. It's not the right way to go about it. And it took me a while, and it took me some hard lessons of dealing with that. I didn't deal with it very well. In particular, I think the first couple of times I dealt with any type of adversity or culture shift or shock or change in like lifestyle, I would drink a lot. I was a freshman in college. I drank a lot. I didn't know what I was doing. I got my first job and I was sad about it, and I was isolated and lonely in a small town. I drank, and I look back now and just tell people, like, don't take it out on yourself like that. It's just not the right way to do it. There's so many other better ways to do it. And I think this is more that's more personal. I think to be more pertinent and more universal about it, Kyle, I would say that understanding that this is and I've been saying this probably a lot more lately than usual, but that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I would tell people that in this time too. And I would have told myself that, 10, 11 years ago when I was coming out of college and there was a recession and, there wasn't a lot of faith in getting a job. I was lucky to have an internship out of college with the minor league team I previously worked for, which bought me some time over the summer. And then I had 5 or 6 weeks of unemployment, and that felt like, as I'm sure a lot of you understand how long 5 or 6 weeks isolated in your parents' house might feel, I was doing the same thing 11 years ago, although granted, much, much different circumstances, I understand. But just in terms of being in a time where nothing is popping, there's no job, nobody's calling me after I've sent in a resume, that's not necessarily on you, and I can look back and say, well, there's a reason that a lot of my friends didn't have jobs right away. There's a reason that I didn't have a job for a month and a half, which felt a lot longer. Like there are a lot of external circumstances. That was 11 years ago, which doesn't feel like it, but it was 11 years ago. Think about how much time has passed. So if you're just looking at what I've done now or where I'm at now, and if you think I'm doing well, great, that's in the eye of the beholder. But if you think that this is a level I want to get to, look how long it's taken. This is a long, hopefully long career for a lot of people. And I would say that to anybody in any volatile business, any industry that has any semblance of volatility, which I'm sure a lot of people feel like a lot of industries have a lot of volatility right now, understandably so, that this is a long journey. And to embed that in you as early as possible so that your passion is what carries you through some of the lower times where maybe it isn't popping off as quickly as you'd like to. That passion is going to carry you in a lot of these valleys of time, that we're all dealing with at various points in our career. And I think a lot of us are currently dealing with right now.
And you get to ESPN at 24, was it? And back in 2011, there's got to be an inherent pressure, right? You go to the full-time network, you get hired full-time by ESPN. Did you feel those pressures, the pressure to perform that and to show people that, yeah, I'm here and now I belong at this level?
I still deal with imposter syndrome. Like, I think I still kind of have a little bit of that in me where I'm like, I don't know if I belong doing this. I don't know if I'm as good. I know I'm certainly not as good as a lot of the people I work, not with directly as play-by-play announcers, but, work around. A lot of my colleagues, like, I'm very aware, or at least, and in my own opinion, and this is so subjective, which is another thing that's hard to battle, when you're putting together these ideas and philosophies. But, I look at Sean McDonough and I go, there's still so much that I can learn from watching him. I watch and listen to Mike Tirico and Ian and Dan Schulman and Beth Mowins and Dave O'Brien and the laundry list of announcers. And I'm just naming people that I work alongside at ESPN, let alone the number of local radio and TV announcers that do a great job, whether it's for teams or network or local or whatever it may be. So I still feel like there's so much more to learn. So you kind of have this tendency to say, well, if I have so much to learn, then I must not be very far along in this. But I don't think it's the right way to kind of think about it. I don't think it's a benchmark of knowledge. I think it's more process based. And the more I've bought into that it's just about getting better. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to nail everything. You don't have to be perfect every time out. Again, easy to say when I'm in a position that I've been in for 9 years at a network and all that. I get that. But the more I've bought into that process of just focusing on the mechanics, the philosophy, and the execution of those ideas, and just trying to do it a little bit better every time, that's led me to feeling like I now it still feels weird to call Sean and Beth and Mike and, when I first started, Brent Musburger and Mike Patrick, to call the Gus Johnsons and the Joe Davises and the Tim Brandos of the world, to call them colleagues and feel like, hey, we're all together in this, and our feelings about our skill level or our confidence fluctuate day to day, but we're all in this together, and it feels easier to call, to apply myself as part of that same category as all these really, really good announcers that, we all looked up to, when we were coming up. It's still strange to say that, but I feel more comfortable with it now than I did certainly 8 or 9 years ago.
Adam, in your college days of Valparaiso or just out of college, you were doing a variety of different sports. How much did that help you when you landed the full-time job with ESPN? Because basically you were able to tell them, hey, whatever you have, I can handle it.
I think so. I think that was a major factor, and versatility. I didn't know versatility was a thing, like when I first started. And I'm sure you guys have felt the same way, especially working, out of the SEC. The passion for those sports, in the spring or in the fall, outside of football and men's and women's basketball. I mean, you guys come from, have worked with or come from programs that have great, baseball, softball, volleyball, women's soccer, women's basketball. Like, there's plenty of great sports other than football and men's basketball that people care about. That's half the battle, So I think when you're in college and you see, here's all these sports, we're given the opportunity to call softball as the play-by-play and the color announcer and the studio host and the update anchor and the producer. Like, we got all these opportunities to work on these sports. We didn't get to call football games. We didn't get to call men's basketball games as the play-by-play announcers. And a lot of, some of the great things about working at an SEC school is, hey, I can go steal a booth or something, or maybe I can on the student station do the, Florida Tennessee game this weekend and put that on my resume tape. But we didn't necessarily have those opportunities, but we could work on the network and we could do updates and we could still do play-by-play for all these other sports. So we didn't know that versatility was like a buzzword. We just thought, oh, the job is to do all these things. What are we doing today? Oh, we're doing soccer. Okay, let's do soccer. We're doing volleyball. Okay. So I was conditioned like that from the time I started working in college. So I never really knew that was like a thing until you get deeper in and you learn more about Ian or Tarico or the Kenny Alberts of the world who do a million sports and do them all really well. And, what Marv Albert used to do when he was working in the 60s and 70s, where he, in the same weekend, he'd call a Knicks game, a New York Giants football game, and do the 10 and 11 o'clock, sportscast on NBC that night, and would sometimes do all this in one single day. Like, you just kind of understand that, oh, that's what versatility is. Cool. We've been doing that for years. So doing it in college, doing it in the 2 years between college and getting hired at ESPN, when you put together your TV tape and you start to get some opportunities doing Division II tennis and doing Division II Elite Eight basketball and doing the Division II Women's World Series and doing the high school volleyball tournaments in Illinois and Wisconsin, and doing all these events to get you into the mindset of how to prep for all of them. And then when ESPN says, hey, can you do the wrestling championships? Well, hey, I just spent 6 months in the state of Iowa on the radio covering high school wrestling. Yes, I can do the NCAA wrestling championships. Oh, you played volleyball and covered it for, 40 matches in college? Yeah, I'm happy to do that sport. So all of those events were like little building blocks to build a foundation of, I guess, what you can call now versatility, a word I didn't even know existed, 11 years ago.
And that's got to be exciting, too, when you do have weeks where you're doing an NBA game, you're doing an NFL game, college football, just whatever the assignment may be. Do you like still switching between the sports and also switching between the mediums of radio and television?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, at times I have in my career felt a little stretched because you can't devote as much time to a sport. A few years ago, working on college softball was my spring, from 2012 to, 2017, for 6 years, 6 seasons, that was my main sport. And for a few seasons doing the World Series. then I got an opportunity to do the NBA, in 2016 and 17, and you start to implement that. And I felt bad. Like I couldn't give as much devotion to a sport that I love so much because this other sport that I've been with for 30 years of my life and I grew up with, now I have an opportunity to work in that league. So I felt at times it's tough. It is tough. It's not easy, and I don't want to downplay that. But I do feel like the enjoyment that I've gotten, and I think the exposure to so many great coaches, so many different philosophies about coaching different sports, coaching different genders, if there is a difference in it, or what the similarities are and what the differences are. So you learn kind of the economics of all of these different sports. You learn the kind of gender differences between the sports in terms of what certain athletes go through, whether it's economically, whether it's socially. Just learning all of these different things has been really awesome, and the enjoyment I've gotten from that has been great. So that's the sport part of it. The medium part of it is, it's going to be tough. At some point, I imagine there might be a scenario where you have to give something up. I may have to give up some radio, at some point down the line, just because you also have to kind of schedule out your own time. But being able to do radio for the NFL, NBA playoff games, Major League Baseball playoff games, major bowl games, top 5 college basketball games, or just sitting, at Dodger Stadium in the middle of June, or in San Francisco on a Sunday night, and describe these places and give that imagery and do it in the form and fashion that I think most of us feel is the craft and the art form of it on radio. That's something that I wouldn't trade a lot of those experiences. Those have been great to me. I have this little collage up here of some moments that I've been lucky enough to enjoy, and 2 of them are radio moments. The Iron Bowl. Actually, 3 of them are radio moments. The Iron Bowl in 2013. To be able to have that radio call forever. My first game at Wrigley Field was a radio game on a Memorial Day holiday, and my first NBA playoff game. And I'm sitting there courtside, and Steph Curry is our post game interview, and that's a photo I'll always remember. And it's that medium that got me into this business, that gave me these types of opportunities that eventually lead to some TV chances. There's great things to love about both. That's the other thing. The camaraderie and the team aspect of the TV side, the combination of having to match up your words and also to be more concise, and which I know is ironic considering the answers I've given in this, but to be concise and to match it up with what your director gives you and what the graphics people give you and what your analyst gives you, and to lay out and to have all these different elements to it. There's fun on both on both ends of it, in both aspects, but I'm glad that I've been able to split as much as I have over the last 10 years.
And radio is really the foundation for all of us. Like you said, getting into this business, most radio guys move on to television. It's kind of hard to do it, vice versa. But I wanted to get into football play-by-play specifically because you, like many people, have been influenced by Kevin Harlan.
Yep.
A snap comes back, it comes back belt tie, and it's thrown to the numbers, a 2-hand backpedaling glove catch. Like, I love that. Roger loves that.
Yeah.
And listening to your call, you do that really well, but you do it in a way where it's digestible for the listener. When did you take that tact in football radio play-by-play where you knew that's kind of the alley that you wanted to take it?
I could probably guess the date. In fact, I think it was November 1st, 2010, or 2009. Sorry, November 1st, 2009. I think I still remember the date. I think that was the first night I called a football game on the radio that actually was on the radio. Like, it was on the air. Believe it or not, I did not call any football games. I called less than 5 football games when I got hired at ESPN. That's something that I still laugh at today, because I feel like football has become a real strength. And I don't know if and again, that's subjective, very subjective, but I feel much better about it now than I did, late 2009. That was the night I called my first game for KUOO Radio in Spirit Lake, Iowa, and that game was in Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is right across the state line from Omaha, Nebraska. So it's about a 4-hour drive from where I was working. And after our game, I was in the car. My partner and his girlfriend had fallen asleep, and I turned on Westwood One, and Kevin Harlan was calling a Monday Night Football game. And I think it was a Jet game, and I just remember I'm fairly certain Mark Sanchez was the quarterback. Might be wrong, but fairly certain. And the way he described everything you talked about, Kyle, like the way he gave you a snap, which I had no idea how to do, or I had no idea that was even like a concept or a philosophy. To talk about looking shoulder into the rights, and not necessarily right in the play, but in the recap of it, at one point or another, saying something to add an element or a layer to the call. That's the first time I'd heard anybody do it that specifically. Wayne Larrabee had been, as I mentioned, is probably one of the 3 best or 4 best ever, and certainly a major influence on me. And I can tell how much Wayne and Kevin are similar because of that level of description. Kevin almost takes it to a different level. I think Kevin might be the most purposefully descriptive play-by-play announcer of all time. And it's a style that has bred a lot of copycats, and I could probably fall into that category. But one thing I realized, like you said, Kyle, the digestibility of it for me was harder. And that's a habit that maybe I think I had to get into the habit of trying to copy Kevin. I think I needed him as a baseline to start. So at least I thought, don't forget that one extra descriptor can make or break the absorption of that play to a listener. And it doesn't have to be every snap. It doesn't have to be every play. It doesn't have to be the 2-yard run. It doesn't have to be on every big touchdown. But to add a layer somewhere. And for me, it was trying to figure out what's the best order of things. That's the hardest part, I think, when you're first starting football radio play-by-play. Is and a little bit on TV as well, but the fundamentals of it for radio is trying to figure out what are the key pieces. The key pieces to all these things are, all right, down and distance, formation, what's next on the priority checklist. If I can give you 1st and 10 at the 25, I formation, backfield, Johnson the tail of the tandem, and I realize I have some time. It's a slower offense or whatever. 2 receivers to the right, single wide left. New Orleans works in a 4-3 defense, 2 high safeties playing 5 yards beyond the sticks. Is it necessary? Not really. It doesn't have to be. But if you know you have time, if you know there's a play, if it's early in the game, you're trying to give a sense of place. Maybe you're not giving that descriptor in the first quarter. Maybe you're giving that in the 4th quarter on 3rd down and 12. And you realize, all right, this is the time to add these 4th and 5th and 6th pieces to this puzzle that a listener is building in their head, maybe because the drama is bigger and the moment is more important. And I want the listener to be able to picture this big play. 3rd down and 13 might be the biggest play of the game. Let me make sure they can see all of it in their head. If it's the first quarter, maybe I'm saying 1st and 10, 25-yard line, Panthers in the I formation with McCaffrey, the back. I could say it's a 3-receiver set. I could say New Orleans is playing 4-3. I could say that the Superdome is at fever pitch on the first drive of the game. Or I can lay out and give the radio audience a sense of the crowd too. Like, there are all these pieces. And because the TV isn't there, because the producer isn't telling you what's coming, the director isn't giving you the pictures, because you are building it, you now have to take all these puzzle pieces and decide where do they fit best, if they fit at all. So I think that's where that balance has come for me, to be able to say on a line drive pass, all right, Breeze back, 5-yard drop, looks left, throws left, line drive pass, chest high catch at the 30-yard line outside the numbers by Thomas. They'll spin to the outside and step out at the 34. It's a 14-yard gain at a 1st down. All right, well, we gave you plenty there. And you can picture all that in your head. But maybe somebody, for somebody on a bigger play, they're not listening as intently as you guys are. I remember that was one thing I learned listening to Kevin. When I was in the car by myself, I was intently and critically listening. So for me, when I hear all these descriptors, I go, that is awesome. That's amazing. How do you do that? And then in practice, or maybe as a casual listener, I'm not paying full attention So when Kevin's voice goes up, or the announcer's voice goes up, I think Kevin Kugler does a very good job of this as well. When his voice goes up, now my attention is peaked. So now I'm listening for what, and again, I hope this is the specificity you guys were looking for.
Absolutely.
This is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
I know, I'm sure some people are rolling their eyes in the back of their head. But when the announcer's voice goes up, now as a listener, I'm tuned in. So maybe I'm not getting every piece that the announcer has given me. So I can maybe catch them up on the back end. If it's 1st and goal, 8-yard line, New Orleans looking to strike first, and I give the descriptor of the formation, it still may not be registering to the listener. But if I say Breeze steps back, looking left, fires back left corner, now the listener is, his voice is going up, what's happening? I might say Michael Thomas reaches, grabs it for a touchdown. I didn't give you a ton there. I gave you enough, but I didn't give you a ton. But the listener is now in. Once they hear touchdown New Orleans, now they're thinking, well, what happened? Well, I need to know what happened there. So now I can give that extra layer. Breeze sidestepped the defensive end, moved around him to his right, squared up, line drive the pass to the back left corner of the end zone, and a reaching two-hand catch by Michael Thomas into those white gloves in front of a 1-3 on his chest. Saints strike first at 6-0. The listener may have gotten more of that. Maybe all of it. The goal is all of it, but maybe they got more of that because you waited until they were really tuned in to give them that extra layer or two. And I think that's where, to fully answer your question and come back full circle, that's where listening to Kevin, listening to Wayne, listening to Ian, doing the Thursday night games, it kind of gave me a better sense for what my balance was and where I wanted to be, and maybe where my pieces best fit. And by the way, it didn't all click on that November night in 2009. It took years, and it's still something I'm working on to learn what's the best piece of information at the best time given to a listener who may not be fully engaged at every single second like you are or I am when we're listening, the three of us are listening to an announcer on the radio critically.
I got to go back and listen to that answer over and over. That was great stuff. And then you go from that.
I hope that's what you guys were looking for. It's a long answer, and there's a lot of
That's what we want.
Yeah, that's some of the philosophical stuff, and that's how it formed for me to try to learn all that.
And then you go from that to the rocking chair rhythm that is baseball on the radio. Who did you grow up? Well, you mentioned Harry Carey, but who were some of the others, specifically baseball, that you grew up listening to? And how do you try and develop that rhythm? Because it's more of a soothing pace. Your voice is a little bit different on baseball than it is on football. How long did it take you to find that right balance of what you needed for baseball on the radio?
Several years, and really the only thing I think that you can do for it is reps. And I'm sure that's not the only way, but it's such a tried and true way to really learn the job, to really learn the machinations and nuances of it on the radio. And universal things too that can apply to other sports, but so much so obviously is specific to baseball on the radio. To do it every night, so to do must have been I'm trying to think out of a 96 game schedule. I'm sure I did probably about 70 out of 96 games for a couple of years doing the Northern League and with the Gary Railcats. To do 150 games a year for the Somerset Patriots for 2 years. That's a lot of reps. Like you can't recreate that 9 innings a night by yourself for the most part, not all the time, but for a lot of the time, a good chunk of games you're doing by yourself. I did the middle 3 innings in Gary every night, and then I would do all 9 in Somerset as the number one guy. So to have that many reps, to have that many innings under your belt, there's only so much you can get from just thinking about it and watching it. To do it is really where you get the most kind of education, and it's hard to buy those reps anywhere at that volume and at that frequency. I would say that Pat Hughes, obviously being the Cubs radio voice, when I first started in Somerset, obviously we're in New Jersey, so you could hear John Sterling, you could hear Howie Rose. Howie has been a huge influence on me just in those 2 years of listening to him a lot. I would sit in the booth after being done with games in Jersey at 10 o'clock at night and the West Coast games are starting up. So I'd sit in the booth and do notes and game notes for the next day and do the recap for the night. And I'd just put on Vin and listen to his first 3 innings when he would do the simulcast at that time. At that time, Vin was simulcasting for the first few innings. So to kind of pick and choose what you learned from them was huge. John Miller, obviously massive influence. Gary Thorne, believe it or not, on the radio because he was doing Sunday Night Baseball. Dan Schulman, I took so much from. And then I think the 2 biggest influences probably are John Miller and John Sciambi. John Sciambi in particular has basically taught me how to be a radio play-by-play guy for baseball, which in turn has made me a better TV announcer as well. And his biggest thing was, and it's honestly the thing that changed my life, and he learned it from John Miller. There's a couple notes. I think this will really help a lot of people. There are a couple things that I think you have to understand. There's 2 modes to the game in baseball, and you can call it a couple different things. It's leaning forward, leaning back, shoes on, shoes off. I think those are the kind of ways that, Joe Davis and Wayne Randazzo and myself and, a lot of guys that have leaned on each other over the years have kind of leaned on each other for advice. One of the things we talked about were take your shoes off in the middle of the 4th inning. Like, are you relaxed? Like, not you don't have to literally do it, but like, are you relaxed? Are you in a mode where you can tell a casual story in a 4-0 game in the 5th inning? Do you have the ability to do that? And do you have the ability to shift your tone when 2 runners get on base in the 7th inning in a 4-0 game, and now the tying run's on deck? Can you build that drama as well? And can you do it seamlessly and weave that from that casual story that you were telling? So it's those 2 modes. The other 2, I would say, are leaning in and leaning back. There's a lean in moment and a lean back moment in every pitch in every game. And you could do this for softball as well. This works college baseball, minor league, major league. There's a lean back and a lean forward moment. The lean forward moment is the pitch, and the lean back moment is everything else. And I guess the lean forward is the pitch and the result of the pitch. Everything else is leaning back. And John Miller would say, can you balance those 2 tones in the middle of the pitch? Kyle Crooks out of Jacksonville, Florida. Good year last year. Hit 323, 17 home runs. We'll take a first pitch fastball strike on the outside corner. Kyle was telling me the other day, we were sitting at the batting cage. He had a great story. He was telling me about his mom, about this great thing that she makes when she's cooking. Here's the 0-1 outside. And then you lean back and you're telling this story. And John Miller, just the way he says that, and obviously you can kind of picture John saying it, that up and down, sing-song cadence he has. That's very specific. That is like dead on specific. Like, you're leaning in to give the pitch and the result of, and then you can lean back out. And the other bow to that John Sciambi taught me, that Boog taught me, was that's how you do it when you're at a baseball game. When you're sitting in the right field bleachers or down the first base line with your buddy. Oh yeah, what did your girlfriend say? Oh, that's cool. What did her friend say? Like, when I looked back this way, we're looking at the pitch. Maybe it's just because we don't want to get hit with a foul ball. That's fine too. But we're all paying attention to the pitch because maybe that's the one he hits out. So you can never forget that what's happening in front of you is still the most important thing. I think when you're a young baseball announcer, you have a tendency to be so wrapped up in the idea of, holy shit, how am I going to be able to fill 3 hours by myself? How am I possibly going to do this? And then when you realize that what's happening in front of you is still going to dictate pretty much everything else, that will help you so much more significantly. It changed how I prepped for games. It changed, more importantly, how I delivered and how much I delivered prep-wise during a game. And it made me realize how important documenting the game is. You still have to say, here comes the pitch. And that was the biggest lesson Boog taught me, was you have to respect every pitch, because it may be the one pitch in the game that really impacts it. And it may come in the second, it may come in the seventh, it may come in the ninth. But it doesn't mean you have to yell louder, you just have to be engaged on every pitch. So it has to be, actually I have my first MLB games scorecard is right here. So I'm just going to use this as so Joe Kelly is facing Jason Hayward. It's Cardinals Braves from 2013. Here's Joe Kelly, right-hander. Jason Hayward, lefty batter, will stand in. First pitch on the way. You're not only respecting the pitch, you're giving the space for the pitch to happen. So think about how you're pacing that. Here's the first pitch. Outside for a ball, 1-0 on Hayward. Hayward so far hitting 278, 8 home runs, 52 driven in. Here's the 1-0. Outside for a ball, 2-0. Jason Hayward, last night, 2 for 4 with an RBI, stole a base. Here's the 2-0. Swinging a foul back, and it's 2-1. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that if you're a listener and you're trying to stay in the rhythm of the game, because that's the most important thing. Baseball is a rhythmic game. You said it right out of the gate. The kind of rocking chair pacing of it. You're trying to give every pitch its space and its respect. And what that forces you to do is to spread out your prep a little bit. So you may not get to that story that you got in the batting cage right away in the first inning. And maybe that's the only time you feel confident using it, because he has a story about that pitcher that they're going to face, but that pitcher is only slated to go 4 innings today, or 2.5 innings in a rehab assignment. So maybe you can only use it on that one at bat. That's fine. Maybe that it's more pertinent there. But you'll know that going in, and you'll say, all right, I'm going to make sure I give this story on the first at bat. And we'll try to spread everything else out. I'll go back to the numbers. You know, I always had a process where the first at bat, I just wanted to give numbers. I just wanted to give base and not overload, but basic stuff. 275, 8 home runs, 27 driven in. Really good speedster, 20 steals at the top of the order. That's it. And then I let the at-bat kind of play out. And I'll describe the player a little bit or give like a sense, especially if it's the first game of a 3-game series. You have to think about these things in that respect as well. But what you're doing is respecting every pitch. You're giving space and documenting the game. And that allows you to spread your prep out, take some pressure off your shoulders. You don't have to know every single thing right out of the gate. You can let the game dictate how you announce a game. It'll help your pacing. It'll slow you down. Because you can't be in the mid. What I cannot stand sometimes is to hear an announcer, especially on the radio, especially, but the TV announcers are guilty too, to talk all the way through the pitch with no regard for understanding that something may happen there. And it's not going to happen every pitch. You're not going to respect 250 to 300 pitches every single night. It's hard. But the goal should be to at least give the space for all those so that you're prepared for the double down the right field line and you're not in the middle of a story when the pitch and the swing are happening. So it's not, Kyle told me a great story about what his mom said the other night, and he swings and launches one to right. Like, there is no rhythm there. You're surprised all of a sudden by what's going on. I don't like that. And Boog, who got it from John Miller, they are two of the best in the business at pacing and rhythm when it comes to baseball on the radio. And I think both of them, when they do their turns on TV, which they both do, they have that same pace. They just don't describe every pitch. They might be telling a story about Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly's arm slot's a little bit strange these days as he's going into the windup. And instead of continuing the story, he'll just say, it's a little bit strange these days. Watch the pitch, say it gets fouled away. He may not say that the pitch was fouled because you can see it on TV, but then he'll pick up naturally in the story. So these rhythmic things are the things that have probably helped and shaped and molded me the most out of anything I've ever heard as a baseball announcer. So hopefully that helps you guys, and I think that'll help a lot of young people who have this weight about the prep on their shoulders. You should still prep, be ready to go, but this will help your pacing and spread your prep out too.
Adam, I think when a lot of people listen to you, whether it's on television or radio, they say, wow, he's got great pipes. What's your approach to voice? How have you developed your voice over the years in this business? And whether it's on television or radio, are you consciously thinking about voice as you're calling the game, making sure you punch different things in your call, or just how do you approach a voice as a whole?
Yeah, I think coming in, knowing the rhythm of the game and trying to establish your rhythm of the game as soon as possible. And you can't always do that. You can't always dictate that. The game is often going to dictate that. So if I'll try to give you an example in 3 major sports. In baseball, if you're doing a game with David Price, it's going to be a lot different than doing a game with one of my favorite pitchers growing up, Greg Maddux. if you want to go more modern, even a little bit more, Mark Burley. Like those are guys that got the ball, threw it. Got the ball, threw it. They're just throwing. David Price takes 25 seconds on average in between pitches. So you got to know that going in. You got to know that. And if you don't know that, you should be cautious about how much info you're giving until you know what the established rhythm of the pitcher is. The pitcher will dictate oftentimes what your broadcast will sound like. If they move fast, you're not going to have as much time. If they move slow, you're going to know that I have 15 more seconds than I would, or 10 more seconds on in between the pitches with this pitcher than I would for that one. So knowing the nuance and rhythm of the pitcher will help you dictate that in baseball. So your voice will match that. I think voice and rhythm are very important to try to keep in sync. If the rhythm of the game is hot and you're on the radio and it's the fourth quarter and you're trying to match that call, okay, well your voice is going to get your voice is going to go up on a lot of moments. So maybe you need to pace those out. And that's been the hardest thing for me to do in particular as a basketball announcer on the radio, especially doing like these playoff games where the intensity is ratcheted up. It's so much fun. Like you're having a blast. So naturally you're going to get more excited and kind of let the rhythm dictate. That's where you have to be able to punch back. You have to be able to know, all right, this dunk in the second quarter may not be the only one we're going to see. So let's hold off on really getting up on some calls until we know we're going to be in the fourth, and this might matter a little bit more. Now, listen, when Jason Tatum dunks on LeBron in the conference finals, that is a highlight that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. And that is a moment that Jason Tatum's going to have forever, and we as NBA fans will always remember. So, yeah, my voice got up on that, and I can justify that. But on a three-pointer to go up 42-39 with 6 minutes to go in the second quarter, you got to know that that's not the biggest moment of the game. And I think for football, so much is predicated on the tempo of the offense. So much. It's just if you've got time, great. Congratulations, you found a mirage in the desert during college football. If you're doing the NFL, the unicorn in that sense is like the Chip Kelly Philadelphia offense where they're trying to get a playoff every 12 seconds. That's rarer in the NFL. So you have more time in between plays. So I got to know, the difference between college and the NFL is the speed of the play itself. The passes are faster. They're zippier in the NFL. Guys cut harder. They move faster. They tackle harder. It just is what it is. It's the bet. It's college all-stars and the elite of the elite in the NFL. So it's going to move faster. So you also can't get too caught up in the rhythm of it. That's why, I listen to Wayne Larrabee, Kevin Harlan, the way they handle the tempo of the NFL compared to what guys in college have to do, where the pacing is faster, but the plays are slower themselves. So your voice kind of has to match that. If you're doing spread offense on the radio, there may be a lot of points. If you're doing Oregon against Arizona, 7 years ago, there may be a lot of points. If you're doing LSU Florida this year, there are going to be a lot of points. If you're doing Tennessee Florida from a few years back, maybe there may not be as many points. So knowing that and having an idea of that will help you dictate what the rhythm of your call is, which then dictates how you kind of should know to use your voice. If you know you're only going to have a handful of big moments, it's okay to punch a little harder when it's 7-0 in the third quarter because it's the first touchdown of the game, and you know that points are at a premium. If it's 52-45, if you know in the second quarter there's going to be a lot of points, it's 21-14 in the first or in the late or early second quarter. All right, let's not blow it all early. Let's know that the game is going to reach an apex further on.
Television broadcasting is such a team sport. It requires the entire team to do well to have a successful broadcast. As the play-by-play broadcaster, just how do you see your role in making sure that you can help everybody else out, whether it's the producer, the director, your color analyst, just what's the best way to be a great partner in television in that role?
I think it's adapting, being adaptable. One thing I feel like I don't know if I have an identity as a broadcaster. Maybe I do, and I'm sure there are certain things that I do often that maybe people associate with a broadcast that I might be working on. But I think my identity changes a lot depending on who's sitting next to me. I think my personality may shift a lot. Maybe not identity. Maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe personality is the right word. It shifts depending on who's next to me. Rebecca Lobo has a very motherly but biting sense of humor. So I know that I almost feel like a little brother to her. So our banter may reflect that. If I'm working with Pat McAfee and Matt Hasselbeck, guys, Pat who's the same age, Matt who plays a little bit younger than the 44 years old he is. If I'm working with those guys, my references will be different. My looseness might be a little bit more on display. I might be a little bit looser with them. Be a little bit more willing to say or go take the broadcast in different directions because of those people next to me. The skill set that the analyst has. All right, if they're really good at replay, well, the producer and I and the director all want to know that. Hey, we've got a great telestrating analyst. I worked with Dusty Dvorak a few years ago, who was only in his second or third year doing national games at that point, and hadn't worked with a telestrator. And starting week 2 that year, would come in and drill on the telestrator. And man, by week 4 or 5, hey, I go to my producer Kim Belton and say, hey, we got to get this guy. Let's telestrate more on these broadcasts. And that is, I think, important in especially when you're working with less experienced analysts. Mac Brown in 2016, Dusty in 2017, when he was in his first couple of years. This year, working with 2 rookie full-time analysts. I think I had to do a lot of reconnaissance and to learn what they're good at, what they suck at, what they're not comfortable with, what they want to get great at. Where are you going to be at your best? And how can we shape the broadcast, the edges of the broadcast? That may dictate how we go to break. We got somebody who Doris Burke loves going to break. She always has a cool line to say, or she's got a great enthusiasm going to break. That's fun to listen to. All right, let's make sure I set Doris up as much as possible going to a timeout. Or, hey, Rodney, tell me what's coming up when we have our rollout going to break so that I can set Doris up better. So that's me knowing what my analyst strength is and then trying to think ahead about what's going to make going to break a little bit better. All right, Doris is great at going to break. I'm going to set her up with a line about Kawhi Leonard. I've got I know we've got an emotions rollout. All right, we're going to show shots like close-ups in slow motion, end of the third quarter, we're going to the fourth. Adam, you narrate this. Okay, so now communicating with my producer, hey, can you give me a sense of what those shots are? Oh, it's both quarterbacks, then both coaches, crazy fan, mascot, go to break. All right, if I know that and I've communicated that and I've gotten that information, or my director or producer has gone out of their way to say, hey, Adam, here's what I got coming up for you going to break. Third quarter, give me a lot. Give me some drama going to break so we can set up the fourth quarter. That communication has now smoothed out a rough edge of the broadcast. These aren't essential, necessities to the broadcast, these fancy looking rollouts, but it sure as hell makes it seem bigger, looks good, and it sounds good when you've got an announcer, an analyst, or play-by-play announcer that has a strong setup going to the break. So having as much communication as possible to predict these things, to be ready for them, and then to be able to smooth everything out. Those are just a couple of examples of what you can do to be as good as possible. And then with the director, setting up shots with your director. Hey, out of the fourth quarter, what do you want? Oh, can I get it? Or request, I've requested, hey, if we got nothing else, start of the fourth quarter, can I please get a shot of both coaches split screen? I have a quick story that I want to tell. They do that on Sunday Night Football and NBC all the time. They tell 10 to 15 second stories, and they're doing that in the middle of breaks, and they've got a laundry list of them. You don't need a ton of real estate and a ton of setup to do great TV. Hey, we're back in 30. Do you know what you want to do? Hey, if we got nothing else, I'd love a split screen of the coaches. I've got a story about how they went fishing in the offseason, and now they're coaching against each other in the fourth quarter in a tight game. having that foresight, having a pulse of the broadcast as a play-by-play announcer as much as possible, depending on what type of analyst and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Knowing all these elements will help you execute them better.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I learned moving to TV is that talk back is a weapon that you can use.
Yeah.
And I worked with Mark Wise once, and he literally slammed it every second. He's just talking to producers, setting things up. But in terms of stand-ups, because that was the one thing that I kind of struggled with moving from radio to television and getting comfortable on camera, bringing in a broadcast, setting up your analyst. How much do you still rehearse those stand-ups when you come on camera? And in terms of just the back and forth you have with the analyst in those types of situations, how long does it take to get comfortable? Because it just doesn't, it's not a comfortable scenario, especially when you're a radio guy. All of a sudden you have this camera that's peeking on you. You're only on camera for about a minute. So how do you get to that point where you feel comfortable in those situations?
It's taken a long time for me to even get to a point of comfort. Those first years, it's the hardest thing. I think it's one of the hardest things, which, by the way, I think you have to get it in your head that this is 2 minutes of a 2 hour, 3.5 hour, 2.5 hour window. Like, that's it. And I understand, like, you're presenting something, you're trying to build it, but the more you can get the pulse of the event itself and then be able to bring that as naturally as possible. If it's a hyped up atmosphere, it's okay to get kind of caught up in it and give a little extra voice on the open. And then when you come on camera, you better reflect that too. You better reflect the mood that you're trying to deliver. If you're hyped up, and that's how I am when it's a big crowd, big college football game, important basketball game with a great student section, championship level event, like, you want to deliver like the importance of that in the voice. You can't come on camera and then just not look like you sounded. You can't come on camera, or you can't be off camera talking about LSU Clemson national championship game. We are so pumped here from New Orleans to bring it to you. And then you come on camera and your shoulders are slumped and you're not bringing that same energy. You want to match what's around you, or if you're not going to match it, dictate what's happening around you. Like, if there's an intensity there, if you're showing shots, of the two quarterbacks in the locker room and they're looking focused, if it's Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence and they're both like stone cold, deliver that. Joe Tessitore, has been applauded in his college football career in particular, because the atmosphere lends to that, about kind of building drama with less wording but more inflection and intonation and kind of the old school 1970s ABC way of how Howard Cosell would build his drama for you. You can still use elements of that and still feel like you're doing the job justice. How do you get to that point where you feel comfortable? I think is a question that a lot of us have to battle with. Reps is one thing. You got to do it. You got to do it enough. You got to be on camera enough to feel like you can do this. And I think the biggest thing you have to learn, you're still a human being. You're still a person on camera. And you can probably act like it. Like, I always felt a little uncomfortable seeing announcers when they come on, if it's not a one shot, if they're being talked to by an analyst or they're addressing an analyst, why wouldn't you look at them? And this is one reason I don't like scripting my opens. I have an outline, or I might have a couple of bullet points that I'm going to hit. I don't script my opens because I don't feel like I can engage with the script itself, wherever it is, if it's on the ground or if it's up on the camera, wherever it is. I can't engage with the script and my analyst at the same time, because then you can tell who's scripting it. And that's not a bad thing. If you want to script it, I'm just saying this for me. But I've seen people on camera, they'll turn to their analyst, and I guess it's the guitar in this case. I'll turn to this guitar and say, they'll look at the analyst, but their eyes will still keep going back towards the camera, almost like they're staring at it, because they might be looking at a script, and that's okay. But I like looking at the person that I'm talking to, because that's what you do as humans. Like, this is how we interact as people, and I think that's a great starting point to getting comfortable on camera, is to just recognize that if you just pretend that it's three people having a conversation and one of them is not saying anything, you're speaking to your buddy. If you two are talking to me and you haven't seen me in a couple of years, and I ask you a question like, hey, tell me about X, Y, and Z on that vacation, and you guys tell me about the vacation, you guys took, like, I'm just going to listen to you, and you guys are going to look at each other when you have something to say, or you're asking him a question. Hey, remember when we did that? Hey, Kyle did this hilarious thing. Remember when you did that thing? And then you look back at me for the reaction. Or then when Roger starts telling the story, you're looking at Roger, and we're both looking at. If you kind of think of it as that,
yeah,
it's just three people sitting in a triangle talking. It makes things a lot easier to deal with, and I think it makes it a more human experience in a almost robotic setting. Here are your two announcers. Here is the camera. Here is my partner. Here is the game. Like, it's easy to get caught in that. I think if you think of it as more human experience and as a human conversation, it makes it a lot easier. Sabrina Ionescu is the headliner here tonight. So happy to have you with us, Adam, Amin, Rebecca Lobo. Rebecca, we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks. One of the great players in the country is starting to become one of the greatest players ever to play. And now Rebecca's giving me her answer, and I'm listening to Rebecca. I might look back to my buddy who's sitting there and, yeah, this makes sense. Like, kind of almost like you're confirming, like, what the person next to you is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes it easier to look at my partner who's talking about something that I think is important. And it helps. It probably gets people's eyes off of you and transitions. Like, your eyes are what people are going to typically look at when you come on camera. You're talking. I'm going to look at your face, which may lead me to look at your suit or your hair or whatever else distracts me. But eventually, when you're talking about something, I'm looking in your eyes. And when your eyes turn to your partner, guess what happens to me sitting on the couch? My eyes start to move to your partner. And now when they start talking, I'm automatically engaged with what they're saying. And when you realize that that's the mechanical aspect and you don't even have to think about that, just doing it like a human being will get all this kind of subliminal and psychological messaging over to the person who's watching you. When you realize that, you don't have to do the machinations. You just do it. It becomes a little bit more of a comfortable experience. So I know there's a lot of layers to that, but I hope that's something that makes sense to you guys.
Absolutely. And final one for me, Adam, you mentioned not scripting out opens, but when it comes to telling stories on television, do you have bullet points? Do you have just such a good memory where you're able to talk to somebody and just feed from the head and what they had said in that conversation that you had to shoot around that morning? Or how do you structure telling stories so there is a beginning, there's a middle, and then there's the ultimate end?
Yeah, I think it's depending on the medium as well. So this is a radio board I have from a few years back. This is from a Colts Steelers game that I had called. And I'm looking actually just to see if I can find something fairly quick. So I don't know if this would fall into this category, but Corey Redding. Corey Redding was the starting defensive end for the Colts at that point. And in his box on his board, here's what I have. Corey Redding, 90, 6'4", 318, 12th Texas, unrestricted free agent, Baltimore, 2012. The top line in Corey Redding's section says, Robert Mathis out. Suspended first 4 games, then suffered torn Achilles during personal workout first week of September. So that's a headline, but I'm giving you this as something you can use for stories as well. That's a trigger for me. So I in that case, I'm able to give you the sentence that I would say to introduce the idea. On radio, I may only need the opening sentence because that really might be all you have time for to give. But that's an important thing, and you need to know. Robert Mathis is one of the great defensive ends in Colts history. He's hurt, and I need to make sure that if Corey Redding makes a play, that's the headline for Corey Redding, and that's what's important, and that's what sticks out. And I think any other layers that you have. If I were to do a TV broadcast for that, I would probably have my iPad with me, and something I started doing this year, and a lot of people would have typed this out or written it, handwritten it in their notes. For me, I just happen to do it in my iPad, and I use a program now just to have it in one place. It's more streamlined for me. But I'll have a lot of trigger lines in a lot of these boxes in my prep work, and then I'll either have something that's fresh in my head that I can add to it that I may have gotten from the coach the prior day. Maybe if it's basketball and I had something like that, it would be something I got from shoot around that morning or something you get from the batting cages to add. Like if I'm prepping for an MLB game, I may have like the headline for Aaron Judge. But if I see him at the batting cage and I ask him about it, well, this may be the third day that he's dealing with an injury, and he might tell me a story about what the trainer did after day 2 and now how he's feeling great today. Well, I didn't put that in my notes, but I can certainly type it into my iPhone or write it down on a notepad and take it upstairs and have it ready to go for that game. So that's the second layer. So that's my iPad for a college football game. I have the second and third layers of these stories that we often get in the meeting with the player or the coach themselves, or maybe the day of the game, the story in the local paper, the feature comes out, and now I have like real depth to that. I don't need to jam all that into on my board day of game, but if I've got the trigger in there and I know a place where I can flesh out that story, awesome. The other thing I'll say is, especially anecdotal stuff, I would say that I do try to type things out in a way that I would basically say it verbatim. Like if I can type it out how I'd want to say it, which means you have to say it out loud, or at least say it in your head, or type it out and delete it and retype it because the wording's better or whatever. That's something that I realized I didn't know I was doing it, but I realized I was doing more and more of that. And I was trying to almost visualize, or I guess hear out loud how I'd want to tell this story, or at least the first couple lines to introduce the story. So I feel like if I don't give you anything beyond these 1 or 2 lines, you still have an idea about this person. You still have an idea about the story. In a modern era, one of the luxuries is a lot of people are sitting on their couch with their phone watching the game, and if they hear a story and only the first couple lines, they might Google it, and they might learn something, and you were the person that introduced them to that. So maybe if you didn't even give them the whole thing, or the real meat of it, because let's say a play happens, an interception happens, and now you can't tell the story about the wide receiver anymore, but you got those first couple lines in, at least they have an understanding of the gist, and now they can explore on their own in this modern era that people are watching sports in.
Adam, we know we kept you over an hour, so we certainly appreciate all the time you've given us today on Broadcaster Hour. Just on our way out the door, we'll kind of turn it over to you to kind of use as maybe a commencement speech to all these young broadcasters that are watching. Just what are your main words of advice? What would you say about the next steps they need to take?
Yeah, again, this is a strange time. It's not the first time that people are dealing with this economically. I'm sure it's the first time that a lot of people are dealing with this socially. Understandable. So it's a strange, understand that this is a messed up time, not only in like the industry, this is a strange time in human history. So like understand and have the perspective that this is a lot bigger than just what we like to do. Something I've taken away from the last 5 or 6 weeks is how non-essential we are in a lot of ways in what we do in sports. You know, like we're all alive and functioning without sports, and we're dealing with it as best as we can. So in a lot of ways, it's not essential because we're still functioning. But what I also recognized in the last 5 or 6 weeks is something that's given me a little bit more of an appreciation for the job that we do, is that like culturally, sports drives so much of the conversation for so many people, and it's an entry point into conversation for a lot of people. So when it's not there and it's not happening, it does like, you feel it. You feel the absence of it, especially if you're in the industry. The further in, entrenched you are, and naturally, the more you're going to feel it. But it touches so much of our culture. So in that sense, we're a lot more essential than maybe we realized. And in the coming months, if we do start to bring sports back with no fans or in a limited release or whatever it may be, or staggered times or whatever it is, your job is that much more important now. Your job is to be accurate. Your job is to be informative. You try to entertain, especially in these times when, things are, people are looking for an escape, certainly. And sports can, whether it's old games or stuff that we're talking about now, it can be an escape for people. It's a lot more essential than maybe we even realized before as well. So take pride in that. Take pride in doing the job. Understand that, the thing I said earlier about being a marathon, not a sprint, very cliche, I understand. It's a very fitting cliche, and I'm going to continue to use it until it's not fitting anymore. And I'm looking forward to the day where we can focus on the sprint rather than the marathon. But right now, it's important to realize that this is a small portion of time in what is hopefully a long arc of a career for you. And, the hope and the goal is that in 2040, you're looking back 20 years ago and say, man, that was a weird year, right? And then that's all there is to it. You hope that it's nothing more than a historical footnote for each person individually. I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but you hope that is the case. So having the big picture perspective of all that, having pride in what you do, having appreciation for the job itself because of the non-essentiality and the essentiality of it, I hope you can take that away and you can understand that for however long this portion of time does go. I know it's a weird and scary time for a lot of people, whether it's just the uncertainty of jobs or their enjoyment or their lifestyle, whatever. This is hopefully for all of us, it's a small blip on the radar in the long arc.
Adam, you're one of the best and brightest in the business. We certainly thank you for your time. Maybe we'll have you down the road because we still have a lot of things we certainly would love to pick your brain about. But thank you for your insights. We really appreciate your time today.
Roger, Kyle, thank you guys. Always good to talk to you guys about this stuff. It's nice to get our minds off of the other stuff and focus on things that we'll all look forward to coming down the line.
Thanks, Adam.
See you guys.
All right, all the best to Adam Amin. We certainly thank him for joining us, and thank you for watching this episode of Broadcaster Hour. If you missed it live, we will have it archived on YouTube, available in podcast form as well. So long, everyone.